My name is Lauren. I am 34 years old and the Director of Operations for a luxury hospitality group. We mean nothing to you, right? My sister sobbed in the crowded room when I refused to host her party. Oh my God, you are so cold, my mother snapped, glaring at me. I smiled, completely unfazed. Trust me, I care, I replied smoothly. Then I pressed play on the security footage. My family's expressions cracked as the room heard the undeniable truth of their deception. For years, I was the family scapegoat, expected to blindly fund everyone else's perfect lives without any gratitude or respect. Before I continue this crazy story, let me know exactly where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set strict boundaries with toxic relatives. The absolute chaos began on Thanksgiving morning. The cold winter sun had barely risen. I was standing in my kitchen wearing my silk robe, savoring my dark roast coffee. For the first time in a decade, I had the day completely to myself. Managing restaurants meant my schedule was a grueling marathon of late nights and relentless pressure. I had sent a polite but firm email to my family on November 1st, explicitly stating that I would not be hosting Thanksgiving this year. I needed rest, and I deserved a single holiday where I was not trapped in a kitchen cooking a massive turkey while everyone drank wine in my living room. I took another long, slow sip of my hot coffee, looking out at the frost-covered lawn. The peaceful silence was shattered by the aggressive crunch of tires on the gravel. A gleaming white luxury SUV pulled into my driveway, dominating the space. The heavy doors swung open and out stepped my mother, Carol. Right behind her was my younger sister, Brittany, wrapped in a designer trench coat, followed closely by her husband, Terrence. Terrence is a hard-working African-American software architect who always tried to keep the peace, but was completely blinded by my sister's manipulation. I watched in absolute disbelief as Terrence popped the trunk of the massive white SUV. He and my mother began dragging 5 heavy-duty coolers, hauling them onto my front porch. The loud thud of the plastic bins hitting the wood decking echoed through the quiet morning. I set my coffee mug down on the counter, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I walked straight to the front door and pulled it open, stepping out into the brisk morning air. Carol did not even bother to look up and say good morning to me. Instead, she pointed a sharply manicured finger at the towering stack of coolers. "Lauren, hurry up and help Terrence bring these inside right now. The turkey is in the blue cooler and it needs to be prepped. The sweet potatoes, green beans, and dinner rolls are in the red ones. Your aunt and uncle are arriving in exactly 3 hours, so you need to get the double ovens preheated immediately." I stood completely frozen on the large wooden porch, staring down at the sheer volume of raw food piled heavily at my feet. "What exactly is all this?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "I told you weeks ago I am not hosting anyone today." Brittany rolled her eyes, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "Oh, please, Lauren, do not be so ridiculously dramatic. You have that massive kitchen with the $15,000 smart oven just sitting there doing absolutely nothing. You cannot expect us to cook in my cramped kitchen when you have all this beautiful space. Just be reasonable for once." Terrence looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight on the front porch. "Lauren, we really appreciate you stepping up to do this for us. Brittany has been feeling so fatigued lately with the pregnancy and everything else. We figured since you are a professional hospitality expert, you could easily throw this meal together in no time at all." "I will gladly stay in the kitchen and help you chop the vegetables." I looked intently at Terrence. He genuinely thought he was being helpful, completely oblivious to the cruel fact that his own wife and mother-in-law were using him to bulldoze my boundaries. But I was not the same anxious pushover I was in my 20s. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, my expression hardening into unyielding stone. I sent a very clear email on November 1st. I said, my voice echoing sharply in the cold air. "I do not work for free on my only day off. I am not unpacking these coolers, and I am absolutely not turning on my ovens today. You need to load every single thing back into that luxury SUV and leave my property right now." My mother let out a sharp, bitter laugh that sounded more like a bark. Her face turned a mottled shade of red, contrasting harshly with the crisp morning air. "You are unbelievable, Lauren," she spat, stepping closer to me until she was practically standing on my welcome mat. "You make six figures managing luxury kitchens for billionaires. You have a $15,000 smart oven sitting right there in your custom-built kitchen. An oven you bought just to show off to the world. And you are telling me you cannot throw a simple turkey in it for your own flesh and blood." I stood my ground, wrapping my silk robe a little tighter around myself against the biting wind. "It is not about the oven, Mom," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. "It is about respect and boundaries. I told you I needed a break and I meant it." "Respect," she scoffed, throwing her hands up in the air wildly. "You do not know the meaning of the word. Ever since you packed your bags and moved out at 18, you have been nothing but a selfish brat. You think because you clawed your way up the corporate ladder, you are suddenly too good for us. Too good for the family that raised you and put a roof over your head. You have always been obsessed with money and status, while your sister here actually cares about family." The irony of her statement was suffocating. I moved out at 18 because she demanded I start paying her rent the day after my high school graduation, while Brittany was allowed to live at home rent-free until she was 28. I built my career from the ground up, washing dishes and bussing tables to pay for my own business degree, while my mother drained her savings to buy Brittany a new car every time she wrecked one. But I was not going to stand on my freezing porch and litigate the past 16 years of her blatant favoritism. I knew exactly who they were. I looked at Brittany, who was now leaning heavily against the railing of the porch, practicing her best, helpless victim face. She pulled her expensive designer coat tighter over her perfectly flat stomach. "Mom is right, Lauren," Brittany whined, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We just wanted to be together for the holidays. Why do you always have to make everything a massive conflict? You have all this space and money, and you will not even share it for one single day. You are acting completely unhinged over a few groceries." I let out a slow, measured breath, refusing to take the bait. "My house is not a free venue for your aesthetic holiday photos, Brittany, and my time is not yours to demand. I am going back inside to enjoy my morning. Do not leave those coolers on my property." I reached for the heavy brass handle of my front door, ready to end the ridiculous standoff. That was when Terrence stepped forward, placing himself gently between me and my furious mother. He held up his hands in a placating gesture, his handsome face etched with genuine stress. "Lauren, please wait," Terrence said, his deep voice a stark contrast to the screeching women behind him. "I know they sprang this on you, and I am truly sorry for the total lack of notice. I really am. I told them we should have called first. But can we just compromise here? I will do all the heavy lifting today. I will carve the turkey, and I will even clean your entire kitchen top to bottom before we leave tonight. Just help her out. Help your pregnant sister out." He looked at Brittany with such absolute devotion and worry that for a split second I almost felt bad for him. He genuinely believed he was protecting his fragile, expectant wife. Brittany immediately placed a protective hand over her stomach, letting out a small, perfectly timed sigh of exhaustion. Terrence wrapped his strong arm around her shoulders, supporting her weight. "She has been so incredibly sick with morning sickness lately, Lauren," he continued, his tone pleading. "The doctors told her she needs to avoid stress to protect the baby. She just wanted a nice family Thanksgiving, and she was crying all night about how much she wanted your special glazed carrots. Please do not turn us away on Thanksgiving. Think about your future niece or nephew." The sheer audacity of the manipulation was almost impressive. Brittany was using a non-existent child to emotionally blackmail her husband into bullying me. I stared at the three of them standing on my porch like a group of parasitic invaders expecting to breach the gates. Terrence was begging, my mother was glaring fiercely, and my sister was smirking behind her husband's broad back, completely confident that the pregnancy card would force my hand and make me submit. I looked Terrence dead in the eye, feeling a sharp pang of pity for the man who was legally tied to this circus. "I am sorry, Terrence," I said softly but firmly. "My answer is still no. You all need to leave." I stepped back inside my warm house, pulled the heavy wooden door shut, and twisted the deadbolt, locking it with a loud, definitive click. I walked back to my kitchen island, picked up my coffee mug, and took another sip. Through the thick glass of my front window, I watched my mother throw her arms up in outrage, while Terrence stood there looking utterly defeated. They were outside in the cold, and I was inside in the peace and quiet. But I knew this was far from over. I watched their white SUV reverse out of my driveway, tearing up a small patch of frost-covered grass in their angry haste. The house settled back into a comforting silence. For about an hour, I actually thought I had successfully defended my boundaries and won the morning. I took a long, hot shower, put on my favorite cashmere lounge set, and sat down on my living room sofa with a good book. The fireplace was crackling softly, and I was ready to enjoy my hard-earned day off. Then my phone vibrated violently against the glass coffee table. It was not a text message from an angry family member. It was an automated push notification from the American Express application. I picked up the phone, swiping the screen to unlock it. My stomach dropped slightly as I read the bold red text glaring back at me. Fraud alert. Did you authorize a charge of $4,500 at Elite Epicurean Catering? Elite Epicurean was a high-end hospitality vendor I actually knew quite well from my industry. They serviced corporate galas and millionaire weddings. I tapped the notification to view the specific transaction details. The charge had just been processed barely 10 minutes ago, but it was not placed on my primary platinum card. The last 4 digits belonged to a backup emergency credit card I had opened over 5 years ago. I handed that card to my mother Carol when she needed emergency dental surgery and claimed she had no way to pay. I explicitly told her it was strictly for medical emergencies, and honestly forgot it existed since the balance remained at 0 for years. Clearly, my mother had held on to it and quietly passed it down to her golden child for safekeeping. Before I could even hit the button to report the charge as fraudulent, my phone screen flashed with an incoming call. It was Brittany. I pressed accept and held the phone to my ear, saying absolutely nothing. I wanted her to speak first. "Well, I hope you are happy, Lauren," she chirped, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet satisfaction. "You ruined my morning, but I just fixed it. I just ordered the Platinum Holiday Package from Elite Epicurean. They are bringing a fully catered 5-course Thanksgiving feast right to your front door at 1 o'clock. Roast turkey, prime rib, truffle, mashed potatoes, artisan breads, the works. Mom and I are bringing everyone back to your house to eat in a few hours." I felt a cold wave of anger wash over me, but I kept my breathing perfectly steady. "You stole a credit card that was meant for Mom's medical bills, Brittany," I stated flatly. "That is literally a felony." "Do not be so dramatic, Lauren," she scoffed loudly over the phone. I heard the distinct sound of her chewing gum. "Mom gave me the card. She said you would not mind since you make so much money anyway. Besides, I did you a massive favor. Now you do not have to cook a single thing today. You just have to open your front door and let the delivery guys set it up in your massive dining room. Terrence thinks I miraculously found a last-minute caterer for only $500, so do not ruin this for me. He would kill me if he knew how much it really cost." "You just charged $4,500 to my name," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I am going to cancel it right now." Brittany let out a loud, arrogant laugh. "You cannot cancel it, Lauren. It is a same-day holiday rush order. Their policy strictly says all sales are final and non-refundable on Thanksgiving." I made sure to ask the representative on the phone. "The food is already being prepped and coming to your house. If you refuse the delivery or refuse to pay the credit card bill at the end of the month, your precious perfect 800 credit score will take the hit, not mine. I know how obsessed you are with your perfect little financial record. You would never let a collection agency ruin your pristine credit over a simple holiday dinner." She really thought she had me completely trapped. She believed she had found a brilliant loophole to force my compliance. She assumed I would just swallow the massive financial abuse to protect my credit and avoid making a public scene with a luxury vendor I worked with. "See you at 1 o'clock, sis," she sneered. "Have the tables set nicely. We are bringing 14 guests, and I expect you to be a gracious host." The line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the dark screen. Brittany had always been spoiled and horribly entitled, but this was a brand new level of financial predation. She had just committed identity theft and credit card fraud without a single ounce of hesitation, all because I refused to bake a turkey. She thought my corporate success made me a prime target for her extortion. She thought I cared more about keeping the peace than protecting myself. She was entirely wrong. I did not throw my phone across the room. I did not scream or cry. Working in high-stakes corporate hospitality for over a decade had trained me to thrive in crisis management. When a vendor failed to deliver for a 500-person gala, you did not panic, you pivoted. Brittany had just handed me the easiest pivot of my life. She thought her little stunt was an unbreakable trap, but she fundamentally misunderstood how credit card fraud and corporate vendor relationships actually worked in the real world. I opened the American Express application on my phone and immediately tapped the button to lock the stolen card. The screen turned gray, signaling the account was completely frozen. Then I dialed the number for the fraud prevention department. The automated system recognized my platinum account status and routed me directly to a live agent. A polite woman named Brenda answered the phone. "Good morning, Ms. Lauren. How can I assist you with your platinum account today?" "Good morning, Brenda," I replied, my voice calm and authoritative. "I need to report a stolen credit card and a fraudulent charge. My emergency backup card was compromised this morning. An unauthorized individual made a $4,500 purchase at a vendor called Elite Epicurean Catering. I need to dispute this charge, immediately file a formal fraud report, and have that specific card permanently deactivated." Brenda did not hesitate. The corporate machinery of American Express moved swiftly. Within 4 minutes, she had flagged the transaction, initiated the chargeback protocol, and issued a fraud alert under my account. I verbally confirmed that I would be willing to sign an affidavit of forgery if necessary. Brenda assured me I would not be held liable for a single cent of the stolen funds. The financial bleeding was stopped, but I was not finished. Filing a chargeback was only the first step. Brittany bragged that the vendor policy stated holiday orders were final and non-refundable. That was technically true for average consumers. But I was not an average consumer. Elite Epicurean Catering was one of the preferred vendors my hospitality group used for million-dollar corporate retreats. I personally managed their service contracts. I ended the call with American Express and immediately scrolled through my contact list, finding the direct personal cell phone number for Gregory, the general manager of Elite Epicurean. He picked up on the second ring. "Lauren, my favorite director of operations," Gregory answered, sounding cheerful despite the busy holiday morning. "Happy Thanksgiving. Tell me you are not calling because one of your properties had a kitchen fire." "Happy Thanksgiving, Gregory," I said, leaning back into my plush sofa. "No kitchen fires today. But I do have a rather sensitive personal emergency regarding an order your team is prepping right now. An unauthorized person stole one of my credit cards and placed a massive $4,500 rush order to be delivered to my home address at 1 o'clock today. I just reported the card stolen with my bank and initiated a fraud chargeback." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line as Gregory instantly grasped the severity of the situation. Fraud chargebacks were a nightmare for vendors because the bank would forcibly pull the money back, leaving the catering company at a total loss. "Are you completely serious, Lauren?" he asked, his cheerful tone dropping into serious business mode. "Give me the name on the order right now." "It was probably placed under the name of Brittany or my mother Carol," I explained. "But the delivery address is my personal home." "Gregory, I want to make sure your company does not lose money on this fraud. Cancel the delivery. Do not send your drivers to my house. I hear you tapping away on my keyboard right now," Gregory said. The clicking sounds echoed over the speakerphone. "Found it. The Platinum Holiday Package. It literally just came out of the prep kitchen and was about to be loaded onto the delivery truck. Consider it stopped, Lauren. We are aborting the delivery. Since the food is already cooked, I will have my team divert it to the downtown city shelter. We can write it off as a charitable holiday donation so my kitchen does not take the financial hit from the chargeback. That is a brilliant solution, Gregory, I said, smiling for the first time that morning. I am so sorry for the massive inconvenience. Do not apologize for being the victim of credit card theft, Lauren. We value our corporate relationship with you way too much. Enjoy your holiday. I hung up. The problem had been completely neutralized. The feast was being donated to charity. Meanwhile, my family was oblivious. They were proudly gathering hungry relatives. Exactly 20 minutes after my phone call with Gregory, my phone buzzed again. I looked down at the glowing screen, expecting to see another angry text from my sister. Instead, the caller ID displayed Terrence. I let it ring 3 times, taking a deep breath before hitting the green accept button. "Hello, Terrence," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. "Lauren, listen to me." He started immediately. He sounded exhausted. The deep timbre of his voice carried a heavy weight of frustration, mixed with a desperate attempt to keep the peace. "I know you are upset. I know they sprang this on you and it was completely unfair. But we have 14 people arriving at your house in less than an hour. The aunts and uncles are already driving over." I remained silent, letting him talk. He let out a heavy sigh right into the receiver. "Lauren, I know you are upset, but I will Venmo you the $500 for the groceries. Just take the money and let us come inside. Do not let my pregnant wife starve today. Just let the caterer set up the food, and I promise we will clean up everything before we leave." I froze, the phone pressed tightly against my ear. My mind raced, piecing together the puzzle of his words. $500. Groceries. Caterer. It hit me like a freight train. Terrence had absolutely no idea. Brittany had lied to him straight to his face. She had spun a massive web of deception, claiming she somehow managed to hire a last-minute holiday caterer for a mere $500. She never told him about the $4,500 luxury package from Elite Epicurean, and she certainly never told him that she funded it by committing felony credit card fraud using a stolen card under my name. For a brief, blinding second, I wanted to scream the truth through the phone. I wanted to tell this hard-working, honorable man that his beloved pregnant wife was a financial predator who was systematically lying to him. I wanted to tell him that her pristine image was built on a mountain of stolen credit and forged signatures. But my corporate training kicked in, abruptly stopping the words right in my throat. In the business world, you never made a major accusation without a solid, undeniable paper trail. If I told Terrence the truth over the phone right now, without the official bank statements and fraud reports in my hands, Brittany would simply deny it. She was a master manipulator. She would burst into theatrical tears, clutch her stomach, and claim I was making up vicious lies to ruin her marriage out of pure jealousy. My mother would instantly back her up. Terrence, wanting to protect his pregnant wife, would choose to believe them over me. I needed physical proof. I needed the official American Express fraud documentation, the canceled invoice from Elite Epicurean, and the credit report showing the exact timeline of the theft. I needed to build an airtight case before I dropped the bomb. "Keep your $500, Terrence," I said, keeping my tone completely even. "I do not want your money." "Lauren, please," he begged, his voice cracking slightly. "Be reasonable. The caterer is already on the way." "No, Terrence," I replied sharply. "The caterer is not coming. I am not opening my doors today. I highly suggest you figure out an alternative plan for your guests, because anyone who shows up on my property will be turned away." "Are you seriously doing this to us?" he demanded, his patience finally snapping. "Are you actually going to sit in your massive house all alone and let your own family sit in the freezing cold? What kind of person does that?" "You will understand exactly what kind of person I am very soon, Terrence," I said quietly. "And you will understand exactly who you are married to. Have a safe holiday." I hung up the phone before he could ask what I meant. I walked over to the large bay window in my living room and looked out at my quiet street. Terrence was a good man trapped in a deeply toxic web, and it pained me to leave him in the dark. But a surgical strike required absolute precision and perfect timing. I walked back to my kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and opened my sleek silver laptop on the granite counter. It was time to start gathering the official documents. I logged into my secure portals and requested the necessary files. The golden child was finally going to face the brutal reality of her own reckless actions. I was going to make sure the evidence was entirely bulletproof. There would be absolutely no room for her standard gaslighting or fake tears once the undeniable truth was displayed. By 12:45, the street outside my house began to fill with vehicles. I sat comfortably at my kitchen island with my laptop open and my iPad propped up next to it. The iPad screen was split into 4 clear camera feeds covering every angle of my front yard and porch. The first to arrive was my Aunt Susan in her silver sedan, followed closely by Uncle David and a few of my older cousins. They parked along the curb and walked up the driveway carrying bottles of cheap wine and store-bought pies. They were expecting a massive 5-course feast. Instead, they found my mother and sister standing on the freezing front lawn, shivering in their winter coats. Terrence was pacing near the driveway, looking constantly at his watch, clearly wondering where the imaginary $500 caterer was. As soon as Aunt Susan approached my mother, Carol launched into the performance of a lifetime. I tapped the screen of my iPad, turning up the volume on the outdoor microphones. The audio was crystal clear. "Susan, you will not believe what she has done," my mother wailed, throwing her hands over her face in exaggerated despair. "We have been standing out here in the freezing cold all morning. Lauren locked us out. She completely lost her mind and locked her pregnant sister out in the freezing wind." Aunt Susan gasped, dropping her hands to her sides. "What do you mean she locked you out? Where is the turkey? Where is the food?" Brittany immediately took her cue. She hunched over slightly, clutching her designer coat tightly around her flat stomach, and let out a pathetic little sob. "She canceled it." "Aunt Susan," Brittany cried, her voice trembling perfectly, "I paid for a beautiful catered lunch with my own money because Lauren refused to cook for us. I just wanted the family to be together. But Lauren called the caterer and canceled the entire order just to punish me. Now my baby is freezing and I am so hungry I feel faint." It was a masterclass in manipulation. Brittany seamlessly blended her lies. She claimed she paid for the food herself, completely omitting the fact that she stole my credit card to do it. She played the helpless pregnant victim and framed me as a jealous, bitter villain who wanted to starve an unborn child. I watched Uncle David step up to my front door, his face turning red with anger. He pounded his heavy fist against the solid wood. "Lauren, open this door right now," he bellowed. "You do not treat your mother and sister this way. Open up." I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I just took another sip of my coffee and pressed the screen record button on my iPad. I also opened the security application and began downloading the raw video files directly to my encrypted cloud storage. Every single lie, every fake tear, every aggressive pound on my door was being permanently documented. In the corporate world, documentation was the ultimate weapon against a hostile takeover. In my family, it was the only way to survive the gaslighting. The crowd on the lawn grew larger as more cousins arrived. The narrative my mother and sister spun grew wilder with each new audience member. Carol claimed I had screamed at her and pushed her off the porch earlier that morning. Brittany claimed the stress was causing her severe abdominal cramps. Terrence looked incredibly overwhelmed, trying to usher everyone back into their cars to stay warm. He kept looking down the street, hoping the delivery truck would miraculously appear. But of course it never did. By 1:15, it became glaringly obvious to everyone that there would be no luxurious Thanksgiving feast. "Let us just go to a diner," Terrence finally said, his voice carrying over the wind. "We cannot stand out here all day. Brittany needs to sit down." "No, we are not going to a cheap diner on Thanksgiving," my mother snapped, dropping her grieving act for a split second of pure entitlement. "Lauren needs to open this door and give us the money to go to a nice steakhouse. She owes us for ruining the holiday." Uncle David nodded in agreement and began violently ringing the doorbell over and over again. The relentless chiming echoed through my empty house. I simply opened the settings on my phone and muted the doorbell chime. The house returned to absolute peace. Outside, the frustration reached a boiling point. The relatives realized I was not going to cave. They huddled together in the cold, exchanging furious whispers and glaring at my dark windows. Slowly defeated and hungry, they began trudging back to their cars. Terrence gently guided a sobbing Brittany into their SUV. My mother stood on the lawn for one final moment, staring up at my house with a look of pure venom before turning on her heel and marching away. I watched the last car drive away, leaving my street completely empty once again. I verified that the high-definition video files had successfully uploaded to the secure cloud folder, safely locked behind two-factor authentication. The physical confrontation on my lawn was officially over, but I knew my family well enough to know the war had just begun. If they could not break my boundaries in person, they would immediately pivot to a new strategy. They would try to destroy my reputation from afar. I closed my iPad and mentally prepared for the inevitable digital fallout. The rest of my afternoon was surprisingly peaceful. I spent a few hours reading my book by the fire and eventually cooked myself a simple but delicious steak dinner. It was the first Thanksgiving in years where I was not exhausted, stressed, or financially drained by the end of the day. But I knew the silence was only a temporary ceasefire. My mother thrived on public sympathy, and my sister fed on attention. They were never going to let this go quietly. At exactly 5:00, my phone vibrated against the kitchen counter. Then it buzzed again, and again. Within 30 seconds, my screen was flooded with a continuous stream of notifications. They were not text messages. They were Facebook tags, direct messages, and notifications from a local community group. I set my wine glass down and picked up the phone. I opened the Facebook application, and there it was sitting right at the top of my newsfeed. My mother, Carol, had authored a massive public post and tagged 20 different extended family members. She had also shared it directly to our large local neighborhood group, which had over 10,000 active members. The post was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation accompanied by a highly edited photo of Brittany, looking pale and tragic, in the passenger seat of their luxury SUV. The caption read like a melodramatic tragedy. Heartbroken. I am absolutely heartbroken today. My eldest daughter, Lauren, who manages luxury kitchens and lives in a massive house, just locked her own family out in the freezing cold on Thanksgiving. She left her heavily pregnant sister Brittany and her elderly mother starving on the front porch. We begged her to just let us inside to eat the food we brought, but she slammed the door in our faces. Wealth and corporate success have made her completely cold and cruel. Please pray for my family tonight as we try to find a hot meal for my unborn grandchild. I read the words twice, feeling a bizarre mixture of disgust and dark amusement. Elderly mother. My mother was 62, played tennis 3 times a week, and regularly got expensive facial treatments, starving on the porch. They brought 5 coolers of raw food, planning to scam me into cooking so they could profit off an Airbnb rental. But the people reading the post did not know any of that. They only saw a grieving mother and a supposedly vulnerable pregnant woman being victimized by a wealthy, arrogant corporate executive. The post was engineered to go viral within our local circles, and it worked flawlessly. It very quickly racked up hundreds of likes, angry reactions, and shares. The comments section was an absolute dumpster fire of self-righteous outrage. People I had not spoken to since high school were suddenly experts on my moral character. Church members who only knew my mother's carefully curated public persona were leaving scathing comments about my lack of basic human decency. Local stay-at-home moms were tagging each other, expressing their horror at how I could possibly endanger a pregnant woman. How absolutely disgusting, one woman wrote. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Lauren. Money really does ruin people. I hope her company fires her for this." Another person chimed in, If she treats her own pregnant sister this terribly, imagine how she treats her employees. I scrolled through the comments watching the digital mob sharpen their pitchforks. A younger version of me would have panicked. I would have drafted a frantic, emotionally charged response trying to defend myself and explain the truth. I would have called my mother crying, begging her to take the post down. But the woman standing in the kitchen right now was a seasoned director of operations. I dealt with hostile vendors, aggressive clients, and crisis management on a daily basis. I knew that arguing in a Facebook comment section was a losing battle. Engaging with a narcissist publicly only gives them the audience they desperately crave. Instead, I treated the viral post exactly like a corporate liability issue. I sat down at my kitchen island, opened my laptop, and began meticulously taking high-resolution screenshots. I captured the original post, the shared versions in the community groups, and every single defamatory comment. I made sure to clearly document the timestamps and the names of the individuals spreading the lies. Every screenshot was immediately uploaded to the same encrypted cloud folder that held the security footage and the fraudulent bank statements. My mother thought she was publicly ruining my reputation. In reality, she was just handing me legally actionable evidence of public defamation. She was building my case for me piece by piece. The digital smear campaign was escalating exactly as I had predicted, but I remained entirely in control. The Facebook post was only the initial shockwave. By 6 o'clock, my personal cell phone began to vibrate relentlessly with direct text messages. My extended family had officially mobilized. In psychology, they call them flying monkeys. They are the enablers and the loyal foot soldiers who do the dirty work for the main narcissist. My screen lit up with venomous messages from people who usually only texted me once a year to ask for free dinner reservations or discounted hotel rooms. Aunt Patricia sent a massive block of text accusing me of abandoning my flesh and blood. She wrote that my grandfather would be rolling in his grave if he saw how greedy I had become. Cousin Derek texted me a string of angry emojis, calling me a corporate sellout who forgot where she came from. Another aunt left a blistering voicemail demanding I immediately wire $2,000 to Terrence to compensate for the emotional damage I had inflicted on his pregnant wife. The messages were a coordinated attack designed to break my spirit. They tried to guilt-trip me, insult my character, and bully me into submission. I sat at my kitchen counter watching the hateful messages pile up. I did not reply to a single one. I simply took a screenshot of every threatening text and added it to my growing encrypted folder. I silenced my phone completely, refusing to give them the desperate apologies or the dramatic reactions they were aggressively fishing for. When ignoring them did not work, their frustration quickly morphed into malicious sabotage. Around 7:30, my corporate work tablet chimed with a high-priority automated push notification. It was a direct alert from our company reputation management software. I opened the application and felt a sudden sharp spike of adrenaline course through my veins. The notification indicated an unusual and sudden surge of one-star reviews on both the Yelp and Google business pages for the flagship downtown restaurant I managed. I clicked the link to view the live pages and my blood ran completely cold. My family was not just attacking my personal life anymore. They were actively going after my livelihood. Cousin Brandon, who had always been Brittany's biggest defender, had apparently rallied his local friends to flood our corporate business pages. The reviews were incredibly damaging and entirely fabricated. One review posted just 10 minutes prior read, "Do not ever eat at this establishment. The Director of Operations." Lauren is a cruel and abusive manager who starves pregnant women and treats innocent people like absolute garbage. I refreshed the page and 3 more one-star reviews instantly popped up. Another fake account posted, "The management here is completely unhinged and hostile." I personally witnessed the director screaming at an elderly woman and locking her out in the cold. "Do not support this toxic business." Another review claimed they had found glass in their food and blamed it on my poor leadership skills. They were deliberately weaponizing my mother's Facebook lies to destroy the stellar 5-star rating my culinary team and I had worked tirelessly for years to build. In the cutthroat luxury hospitality industry, reputation is absolutely everything. A sudden, unexplained drop in online ratings or allegations of abusive management could trigger a corporate audit. It could cost the restaurant hundreds of thousands of dollars in canceled VIP reservations and corporate event bookings. I stared at the glowing screen of my tablet, realizing the sheer magnitude of what they were attempting to do. My family had officially crossed the strict line from petty domestic drama into intentional corporate sabotage. They were actively trying to ruin my career and get me fired from the executive position I had sacrificed my entire 20s to achieve. They assumed that threatening my job would terrify me into surrendering. They thought that if they applied enough public pressure to my professional life, I would come crawling back to my mother, begging for her forgiveness and handing over my credit cards to make the bad reviews stop. They thought they were playing a brilliant game of chess, but they forgot one crucial detail. I was not a helpless, anxious teenager trapped in my mother's house anymore. I was a high-level corporate executive. I handled million-dollar vendor disputes, negotiated ruthless contracts, and protected corporate assets for a living. By attacking my flagship restaurant, they had just dragged a massive legal entity into their petty family feud. I took high-resolution screenshots of every single fake review, making sure to capture the usernames, which blatantly matched my cousins and their spouses. I cross-referenced their names with the restaurant reservation system to easily prove they had never actually dined at the establishment. The evidence of their coordinated cyber harassment was entirely undeniable. I closed my tablet and picked up my phone. It was time to stop playing defense and launch a devastating counterstrike. I scrolled past the missed calls from my angry aunts and found the contact for Jonathan Hayes, the lead corporate attorney for our hospitality group. It was Thanksgiving night, but I knew he always kept his phone on for executive emergencies. I hit dial and waited. He picked up on the third ring, sounding slightly out of breath but entirely alert. "Lauren," he said over the background noise of a television. "Is there a fire at the downtown property, or did a pipe burst in the main dining room?" "Neither, Jonathan," I replied, walking into my home office and turning on the desk lamp. "But we do have an active crisis regarding the flagship restaurant. A coordinated group of individuals has launched a targeted cyber attack on our Yelp and Google business pages. They are posting fabricated one-star reviews, alleging abusive management and health code violations. I have already secured high-resolution screenshots and cross-referenced the names with our reservation database. None of them have ever dined with us." The background noise on Jonathan's end instantly vanished as he stepped into a quiet room. His tone shifted from casual to strictly professional. "Who is coordinating the attack?" he asked sharply. "A competitor. A disgruntled former employee." "No," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "It is my mother, Carol, and my sister, Brittany. They are using their personal social media platforms to incite our extended family members, including my cousin Brandon, to bomb the restaurant because of a private domestic dispute. They are attempting to weaponize my professional career to force me into compliance over a financial matter." Jonathan let out a low whistle of disbelief. "Family or not? Lauren, that is textbook tortious interference with prospective economic advantage. They are intentionally trying to damage a multi-million-dollar corporate entity to settle a personal vendetta. If those fabricated reviews drop the overall online rating of the flagship location, it could easily cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in canceled holiday event bookings. We absolutely cannot allow this false information to remain online for even a single day." "Exactly," I agreed, opening a blank document on my laptop to take notes. "I need you to draft a formal cease and desist order right now. I want it addressed directly to my mother, Carol, and my sister, Brittany. They are the primary instigators orchestrating this entire mob. Outline the exact legal definitions of defamation, libel, and tortious interference in the clearest terms possible. Make it explicitly clear that as the ringleaders, they are going to be held personally liable for all financial damages caused by the followers they incited." I am booting up my computer right now, Jonathan said, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the phone line. What are our specific terms of compliance? Give them exactly 24 hours to remove every single fake review and permanently delete the viral Facebook post I instructed. If the posts are not completely scrubbed from the internet by tomorrow evening, the hospitality group will officially file a massive civil lawsuit against both of them. Inform them that our legal team will not hesitate to subpoena their internet service providers. We will drag every single cousin and aunt who left a fraudulent review into a grueling legal deposition. Tell them we will fiercely seek maximum financial compensation for intentional corporate sabotage. Jonathan paused his typing for a brief second. It will be incredibly ruthless, Lauren, he warned gently. Are you absolutely sure you want to drop a corporate legal threat of this magnitude on your own mother and pregnant sister? Once I send this letter on official company letterhead, there is no going back. The family dynamic will be permanently shattered, and they will be legally terrified. They thrive on terrorizing others, I replied, my voice devoid of any warmth. And my sister is not actually pregnant. She is a highly manipulative financial predator using a fake medical emergency to commit identity theft against her husband. I am done protecting them from the consequences of their own malicious choices. Send the letter, Jonathan. Send it via certified email to both of their accounts immediately. Then arrange for a physical legal copy to be delivered directly to my mother's front door by priority courier first thing tomorrow morning. I want them to wake up to the absolute reality of their actions. Consider it done, he said, his voice resolute. I will copy you on the emails as soon as they go out. Have a good night, Lauren. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my heavy leather office chair. The trap was meticulously set, and the jaws were about to snap shut. My family genuinely thought they were dealing with a compliant daughter they could publicly bully without facing any real repercussions. They were about to discover exactly what happens when you cross a woman who knows exactly how to wield corporate legal power. I closed my laptop, turned off the desk lamp, and walked to my bedroom. I went to sleep feeling more peaceful and empowered than I had in over a decade, knowing tomorrow would change everything forever. The next morning unfolded exactly as I had orchestrated. At precisely 8:00, a priority courier delivered the physical copies of the cease and desist order. By 10:00, the viral Facebook post mysteriously vanished. By noon, every single fabricated one-star review on Yelp and Google Business had been completely scrubbed from the internet. The sheer terror of a massive corporate lawsuit had successfully shattered their arrogant illusion of power. For the next 4 days, my phone was completely dead. There were no angry text messages from flying monkey cousins and no voicemails from outraged aunts. My mother and sister were legally gagged and absolutely terrified. I used the quiet time to finalize my preparations. I organized the American Express fraud documents, the Elite Epicurean cancellation invoice, and the downloaded security footage into a neat physical folder. I was waiting for their next move. They would desperately need to regain control of the narrative. The breakthrough came on Tuesday afternoon. My phone vibrated on my office desk. The caller ID displayed Terrence. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice perfectly professional. Hello, Terrence. Lauren, thank God you answered. He breathed a heavy sigh of relief. His deep voice sounded incredibly strained, carrying the heavy weight of a man trying to hold a fractured family together. I am calling to ask for a massive favor. Please, just listen to me before you hang up. I am listening, Terrence, I replied, leaning back in my office chair. Things have gotten completely out of hand, Lauren. He continued, his tone pleading. The legal letters you sent to Carol and Brittany terrified them. Brittany has been crying uncontrollably. She is terrified you are going to send her to jail, and the stress is severely affecting her pregnancy. Threatening to sue your own mother and pregnant sister is a severe overreaction. We need to fix this right now before it permanently destroys the family. A mistake, I repeated flatly. They attempted to systematically destroy my corporate career, Terrence. That was a calculated attack. I know you are hurt, he insisted gently, clearly unaware of the actual financial crimes his wife had committed. I know they crossed a line, but I cannot let my child be born into a family that communicates through corporate lawyers and restraining orders. I am stepping in to mediate this. I want to clear the air formally and properly. What exactly are you proposing, Terrence? I asked, although I already knew where this was heading. I rented a private dining room at the Oakwood Country Club for this Saturday evening, Terrence explained. I am paying for it myself. It will just be you, me, Brittany, your mother, and a few of the older relatives to act as neutral witnesses, a formal peace treaty meeting. We will sit down, eat a nice dinner, and talk through this misunderstanding like rational adults. Brittany wants to apologize to you face to face. Please, Lauren, do this for me. Do this for the baby. I just want my family to be whole. I listened to the desperate hope in his voice. He genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. He thought he was playing the honorable peacemaker, fixing a silly sibling rivalry. He had absolutely no idea that he was paying to host a woman who was actively draining his trust fund and destroying his credit score. He did not know that Brittany's tears were from the sheer panic of getting caught committing felony fraud. My mother and sister were undoubtedly using Terrence as a human shield. They knew they could not contact me directly without violating the cease and desist order, so they manipulated him into organizing a forced reconciliation. They assumed that if they cornered me in a public country club, I would be too embarrassed to enforce the legal threats. They wanted to force me to drop the charges and apologize. It was a brilliant trap, if I had been the woman they thought I was. But they had just handed me the exact environment I needed. A private room, all the key players gathered together. A controlled environment where they could not run away when the truth came out. I will be there, Terrence, I said smoothly. Saturday evening at Oakwood. Send me the exact time and the room number. Thank you, Lauren. Terrence said, his voice flooding with genuine gratitude. You promise we will make things right? Oh, I know we will, I replied quietly. I ended the call and looked at the thick manila folder sitting on my desk. The stage was officially set. They wanted a dramatic family meeting to force my submission. Instead, they were going to get a front row seat to their own absolute destruction. I spent the rest of the week reviewing the evidence. I was not going to Oakwood Country Club to sign a peace treaty. I was going there to burn their entire house of cards to the ground. Saturday evening arrived with a biting chill. I pulled my Porsche into the valet circle at Oakwood Country Club, handed my keys to the attendant, and walked through the heavy glass doors. I was dressed in a tailored charcoal blazer and crisp trousers, projecting the exact same unbothered authority I used in corporate boardrooms. Tucked securely under my left arm was the thick manila folder containing the absolute destruction of my family's fabricated reality. I checked the directory and walked down the long carpeted hallway toward private dining room number 4. I pushed the oak door open. The atmosphere inside was instantly suffocating. Sitting around a large circular mahogany table were the key players of my personal nightmare. My mother Carol sat rigidly in her chair, nursing a glass of red wine with a scowl etched deeply into her face. Next to her was Brittany, wearing a loose-fitting maternity dress that deliberately emphasized her completely flat stomach. Flanking them like loyal bodyguards were Uncle David and Aunt Patricia, the same enablers who had sent me hateful text messages days prior. Terrence was the only person who stood up when I entered. He looked exhausted, wearing a nice button-down shirt, but carrying heavy dark circles under his eyes. "Thank you for coming, Lauren," he said, offering a tired but genuine smile. "I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us." I nodded politely to him and took the only empty seat available directly across the table from my mother and sister. I placed the manila folder face down on the table right next to my water glass. The rest of the table glared at me with naked hostility. Terrence cleared his throat, raising his hand slightly to command the room. "I asked everyone here tonight because we are family." He began, his deep voice carrying a tone of desperate hope. "Family means everything. We had a massive breakdown in communication on Thanksgiving, and the fallout has been incredibly damaging. But we are not going to let a misunderstanding tear us apart. We are here to listen to each other apologize and find a way to move forward peacefully for the sake of the new baby. He barely finished his sentence before my mother slammed her wineglass down onto the table. Misunderstanding, she scoffed loudly, pointing a manicured finger across the table directly at my face. There is no misunderstanding, Terrence. Your sister-in-law is a cruel, vindictive monster. We came to her home to celebrate a holiday as a family and she locked us out in the freezing cold. And then she had the absolute audacity to send a corporate lawyer after her own mother and pregnant sister just because we told the truth online. Terrence raised a hand, trying to calm her down. Carol, please, we agreed to keep voices down. We are here to heal, not to fight. But my mother was completely unhinged, fueled by the false security of having an audience. Healing. She snapped, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. How can we heal when she intentionally traumatized my youngest daughter? She stressed Brittany out so badly that she put my unborn grandchild in physical danger. She thinks her fancy job gives her the right to treat us like absolute garbage. Brittany, perfectly on cue, let out a dramatic sob. She pressed a napkin to her dry eyes and leaned into Terrence's shoulder. I was so scared, Lauren, she whimpered, her voice shaking with fake vulnerability. I just wanted to eat the nice meal I paid for. I did not do anything wrong to you. Why are you trying to ruin my life with lawyers and threats? I could have lost the baby because of the panic attack you caused me. Aunt Patricia gasped, reaching over to pat Brittany on the arm. It is okay, sweetie, we are here for you, Patricia cooed, glaring venomously at me. Uncle David leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the table. You need to drop the legal threats tonight, Lauren, he demanded aggressively. You are going to apologize to your mother and your sister right now. You are going to pay for the emotional damage you caused and beg for forgiveness. I sat perfectly still, absorbing their coordinated attack without a single flinch. They were performing exactly as I anticipated, using guilt, shame, and sheer numbers to force my submission. They thought they had me completely cornered. I looked at Terrence, who was watching me closely, waiting for me to break down and apologize. I slowly reached out and rested my hand firmly on top of the manila folder. I am not here to apologize, I said, my voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. The room erupted the moment the words left my mouth. Uncle David slammed his heavy hand against the table, rattling the silverware. Aunt Patricia gasped loudly, pressing her hand against her pearls in exaggerated horror. My mother Carol looked as though I had just slapped her across the face. Terrence closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. He genuinely thought his diplomatic country club meeting was going to magically fix a lifetime of toxic family dynamics. But Brittany was fully prepared for my resistance. She did not miss a single beat. Her tearful victim persona instantly vanished, replaced by a sharp, calculating glare. She reached into her expensive designer handbag and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. With a dramatic flick of her wrist, she slammed the document down onto the center of the mahogany table. The sharp smack echoed in the quiet private dining room. Look at it, Lauren, she demanded, her voice trembling with manufactured rage. Look at exactly what your selfish corporate boundaries cost this family. I did not reach for the paper. I simply leaned forward slightly, letting my eyes scan the document from across the table. It was printed on what looked like official hospital letterhead. At the very bottom, next to the bold total, was a staggering figure: $8,000. That is an emergency room hospital bill. Brittany continued, pointing an aggressive finger at the paper. When you locked me out in the freezing cold on Thanksgiving, my body went into a state of severe shock. The sheer panic of being abandoned by my own sister, combined with the freezing temperatures, caused me to experience violent abdominal cramps. I started having early contractions, Lauren. I had to be rushed to the emergency room because my baby was in extreme distress. My mother immediately jumped in to reinforce the lie. She leaned over the table, her eyes blazing with absolute fury. You almost killed your unborn niece, Lauren. You put my grandchild in the hospital because you were too busy drinking coffee in your perfect little kitchen to open your front door. The doctors said Brittany experienced a dangerous spike in blood pressure. She had to be put on an intravenous drip and monitored for 12 hours just to stabilize the pregnancy. I shifted my gaze to Terrence. He looked completely hollowed out. "Terrence, did you actually see the doctors treat her?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. Terrence looked down at his hands, clearly uncomfortable. "I drove her to the emergency room, Lauren," he said, his voice thick with exhaustion. But because of the strict flu season protocols, they only allowed the patient in the triage area. I had to sit in the waiting room all night while they ran the tests. But the doctors told her the stress was the primary trigger. It was a brilliantly executed lie. Brittany had faked the symptoms, forced her husband to wait outside the secure medical area, and then emerged hours later with a fabricated story and a forged invoice. She knew Terrence would never question her medical privacy or demand to speak to the attending physician because he trusted her implicitly. And since my insurance obviously does not cover emergency pregnancy complications caused by emotional trauma, you are going to pay for it. Brittany sneered, crossing her arms tightly. You are going to transfer $8,000 into my bank account right now. Tonight. If you refuse to pay this medical bill, I will hire a personal injury lawyer first thing on Monday morning. I will drag you into a public courtroom and sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress and reckless endangerment of a pregnant woman. Uncle David nodded vigorously in agreement. You have the money, Lauren, he growled aggressively. You manage luxury restaurants for millionaires. $8,000 is absolute pocket change to you. Write the check tonight, and maybe your sister will consider dropping the lawsuit and forgiving you for what you did. Aunt Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. If this goes to court, the local news will absolutely pick it up. Imagine what your corporate bosses will do when they find out their director of operations almost killed a baby over a Thanksgiving dinner. You will lose your job, Lauren. You will lose everything you worked so hard for. Just pay the bill and apologize. They were attempting a full-scale extortion. They believed the threat of a public lawsuit combined with the fake medical bill would be the ultimate kill shot. They thought I would be so terrified of losing my corporate reputation that I would instantly open my checkbook and surrender my hard-earned money just to make the nightmare stop. I sat back in my chair and looked at the single sheet of paper sitting on the mahogany table. I did not feel a single ounce of fear. I felt an overwhelming sense of calm because I knew exactly what was inside the thick manila folder resting under my hand. The trap they set for me was about to snap completely backwards. I looked directly into Brittany's eyes, matching her arrogant glare with a cold, calculated smile. My smile was the spark that finally ignited the powder keg. Seeing me remain entirely unaffected by her forged medical bill shattered Brittany's arrogant composure. She realized I was not following her carefully rehearsed script. The realization sent her into a state of absolute hysterics. She slammed both of her hands flat onto the heavy mahogany table, shaking the water glasses and silverware. Her face contorted into a mask of pure agony as tears rapidly streamed down her cheeks. "We mean nothing to you, right?" she sobbed violently, her voice cracking loudly and echoing off the walls of the private dining room. "I am sitting here telling you that my innocent baby was almost lost because of your cruelty, and you are just sitting there smiling at me like I am some kind of joke. You have always hated me, Lauren. You have always been jealous of me, and now you are trying to destroy my family." My mother shoved her heavy wooden chair back, causing the legs to scrape harshly against the polished floor. She stood up, leaning entirely over the table and pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "Oh my God, you are so cold," she snapped, her teeth bared in a feral grimace. "You have absolutely no heart. Your own sister is begging you for help, and you look at her like she is trash. You care more about your corporate title and your bank account than you do about your own flesh and blood. You are a complete disgrace to this family." Uncle David leaned back in his chair, crossing his massive arms over his chest with a look of supreme disgust. Aunt Patricia dramatically pulled a tissue from her purse and handed it to Brittany, acting as if she were comforting a survivor of a terrible tragedy. They all looked at me as if I were a monster who had just committed an unspeakable crime right in front of them. But the most agonizing reaction came from Terence. He did not yell or scream. He did not point fingers or throw insults. Instead, he just stared at me with an expression of profound, devastating disappointment. He looked completely hollowed out by the sheer cruelty he believed I was displaying. He slowly shook his head, running a tired hand over his face. "I thought you were better than this, Lauren," he said, his deep voice thick with sorrow and regret. "I really did. I defended you to everyone. I told them you just panicked on Thanksgiving and that you were stressed from work. I paid for this entire room tonight because I genuinely believed we could fix this. But sitting here watching you smile while my wife cries over the near loss of our child, I do not even recognize who you are anymore. You need to pay that medical bill right now and make this right." After Terence finished speaking, the entire room fell dead silent. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed down on the room like a physical weight. The only sounds remaining were the faint hum of the country club air conditioning, the muffled clinking of dishes from the main kitchen down the hall, and the exaggerated sniffles coming from Brittany. They were all waiting. They were waiting for the immense pressure of their collective guilt to finally crush me. They fully expected my cold corporate facade to shatter into a million pieces. In their minds, this was the grand finale of their extortion play. They had applied maximum emotional pressure, threatened my professional career, invoked a terrifying medical emergency, and isolated me in a room full of hostile witnesses. They were waiting for me to drop my eyes to the floor in absolute shame. They were waiting for me to whisper a frantic, tearful apology. More than anything, they were waiting for me to reach into my tailored charcoal blazer, pull out my designer checkbook, and write an $8,000 check to buy their temporary forgiveness. 5 agonizing seconds passed, then 10. Brittany kept her face buried in her hands, peering through the gaps in her fingers to check if I was breaking yet. My mother stood completely rigid, holding her breath in anticipation of my surrender. Uncle David tapped his fingers impatiently against the wood, clearly expecting me to beg for mercy. I let them sit in that deeply uncomfortable silence. I wanted them to fully commit to their aggressive positions. I wanted them to feel the absolute peak of their false power and dominance. I wanted the silence to stretch out so long that the tension in the room felt entirely unbreakable. I did not reach for my purse. I did not pull out a checkbook. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I kept my eyes locked onto Brittany and let my smile widen just a fraction. "Trust me, I care," I said smoothly, my voice slicing through the heavy silence like a surgical blade. Then I slowly reached for the thick manila folder resting on the table. But instead of opening the folder, I simply pushed it an inch forward. I reached down into my structured leather tote bag resting on the floor beside my chair. When my hand emerged, I was not holding a checkbook or a pen. I was holding my silver corporate tablet. The collective confusion in the room was palpable. Uncle David dropped his arms to his sides, his heavy brow furrowing in deep annoyance. Aunt Patricia stopped patting Brittany on the shoulder and stared at me blankly. My mother Carol let out an exasperated sigh, assuming I was trying to stall the inevitable. "What are you doing, Lauren?" my mother snapped sharply. "Put your little toy away and open your checkbook. We are not playing games here. Your sister needs to be compensated for her medical trauma right now." I completely ignored her demands. I stood up from my chair, smoothing out the front of my tailored blazer. My eyes scanned the perimeter of the private dining room. As I had requested when Terence first told me the location, the room was equipped with a large, high-definition smart television mounted securely to the oak-paneled wall. It was meant for corporate retreats and presentation slides. It was absolutely perfect for my needs. I tapped the screen of my tablet, waking it up. I swiped down from the top corner and selected the screen mirroring icon. The large television on the wall immediately flickered to life, emitting a soft blue glow before sharply displaying the exact contents of my tablet screen. Brittany lowered her hands from her face entirely. The violent sobs that had been racking her body just moments ago vanished into thin air. Her tearless eyes darted nervously between me and the large screen on the wall. The sudden shift in my demeanor from silent target to active presenter unsettled her deeply. She was a predator who suddenly realized she had walked directly into a steel trap. "Lauren, what is this?" Terrence asked, his voice laced with heavy confusion. "What are you putting on the screen?" I turned to face Terrence, exclusively keeping my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "Terrence, you brought me here today to find the truth." He nodded slowly, watching me closely. "In my profession, when we encounter a major dispute regarding liability and financial damages, we never rely on emotional testimonies or questionable pieces of paper. We rely on verified documented evidence. You asked me to pay an $8,000 medical bill for a trauma that supposedly occurred because I ruined a spontaneous family Thanksgiving dinner. I think it is only fair that we review exactly how spontaneous that dinner actually was." I turned my attention back to my tablet. With a single tap, I opened the secure cloud folder labeled Thanksgiving Evidence. The large television mirrored my actions flawlessly for the entire room to see. A grid of high-resolution video files appeared on the screen. Uncle David scoffed loudly, attempting to regain control of the room. "We do not need to watch your stupid home security videos, Lauren. We all know what happened. You locked your family out. Pay the bill or we will see you in court." I did not even look at him. I selected a specific video file from the grid. The date stamped across the bottom of the thumbnail read, November 23rd. That was exactly 3 days before Thanksgiving. The thumbnail image clearly showed my mother Carol and my sister Brittany standing together on my front porch in broad daylight. My mother gasped sharply, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Her face drained of all color in a matter of seconds. Brittany visibly stiffened her hands, gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly her knuckles turned completely white. They instantly recognized the footage. They knew exactly what conversation they had on my porch that Tuesday afternoon, and they knew my security camera had recorded every single word. Aunt Patricia looked back and forth between my mother and the television screen, completely baffled by the sudden panic. "Carol, what is she talking about?" Patricia asked, her brow wrinkled in confusion. "Why are you so afraid of a security video?" My mother ignored her sister-in-law entirely. She took a step toward the wall as if she were going to physically pull the television down. "Lauren, I said turn it off," she commanded desperately, her previous arrogant tone entirely replaced by raw fear. "This is a private family matter. You have absolutely no right to record us without our permission. Actually, Mom, my front porch is clearly visible from the public street," I replied, citing the legal reality with practiced ease. "There is no reasonable expectation of privacy when you are standing on my front doorstep shouting about your financial schemes. Everything captured on that camera is legally admissible." Brittany realized that screaming at me was not going to work. She immediately pivoted back to her husband. She reached out and dug her manicured nails into Terrence's forearm. "Terrence, make her stop." Brittany pleaded, her voice high and breathless. "She is just trying to humiliate me." She doctored the footage. "You know how good she is with computers. Please tell her to turn it off. Let us just go home. I do not even care about the medical bill anymore. Let us just leave right now." Her sudden willingness to completely drop an $8,000 extortion demand over a single video thumbnail was the most damning reaction possible. Terrence looked down at his wife's gripping hands. The blind trust that had shielded him for years began to fracture visibly in his dark eyes. He looked up at the television screen and then back at me. "No," Terrence said, his voice incredibly low and firm. He gently but deliberately pried Brittany's fingers off his arm. "She said she has proof. I want to see what is on that video." Brittany slumped back into her heavy wooden chair, looking as though all the air had been violently knocked out of her lungs. You wanted a family meeting, Mom, I said, looking directly into my mother's terrified eyes. Now we are having one. I pressed the play button on my tablet. The room went completely silent as the high-definition video began to roll on the massive screen. The shift in power was absolute and irreversible. The television screen flickered brilliantly, bringing the 4K resolution of my porch security camera into sharp focus. The timestamp in the corner displayed Tuesday, November 23rd, at 2:15 in the afternoon. The bright afternoon sun illuminated my mother Carol and my sister Brittany as they stood casually on my front welcome mat. They were holding heavy shopping bags filled with expensive items, completely contradicting their constant claims of financial hardship. Because my Ring doorbell was equipped with advanced noise cancellation, the audio was incredibly crisp. The quiet private dining room of the country club amplified their voices perfectly, making it sound as though they were standing right next to our mahogany table. On the screen, my mother reached forward and pressed the doorbell button. She waited a few seconds, looking annoyed, before turning to Brittany. "She is not home yet," Carol said on the recording. "Probably still at that stupid corporate office of hers." Brittany sighed, shifting a large shopping bag. "Are you sure this is going to work, Mom?" Lauren sent that email saying she was not hosting Thanksgiving this year. She sounded pretty serious about it. What if she just refuses to open the door when we show up with all the food on Thursday? My mother let out an arrogant laugh on the video, waving her hand dismissively. "Let her try to refuse. We will just show up unannounced bright and early. We will unload all the coolers directly onto her porch and make a massive scene if we have to. Just force her to host Brittany. We will dump the raw groceries, tell her the family is arriving in 3 hours and run. She manages luxury restaurants for a living, so she will naturally take over. She cannot stand the embarrassment of a failed event. She will cook the turkey and clean the house just to save face." In the dining room, Aunt Patricia gasped loudly, pressing her napkin against her mouth. The revelation that the entire Thanksgiving morning ambush was a carefully calculated, premeditated scheme completely shattered the victim narrative my mother had spent the last week spinning. They did not just happen to need help. They intentionally targeted my professional pride to force me into free labor. But the video was far from over. The most damaging part was still to come. On the screen, Brittany nodded, adjusting her expensive coat. "Good, because I am absolutely not cooking this year. But what about your house, Mom? Why cannot we just have everyone over to your place like we used to? Your dining room is perfectly fine and your kitchen is huge. Terrence keeps asking me why we are not just going to your house." My mother leaned closer to Brittany, lowering her voice slightly, as if sharing a brilliant secret. But the high-definition microphone captured every single syllable with devastating clarity. "I cannot host at my house this year, Brittany," my mother said, a wicked smile spreading across her face. "I already listed my house on Airbnb for the holiday weekend. I got a booking from a wealthy family coming in from out of town. They are paying me $3,000 for the 4 days. There is absolutely no way I am giving up that kind of easy cash just to cook a turkey for your Uncle David and Aunt Patricia." The reaction in the private dining room was instantaneous and explosive. Uncle David, whose face had been an angry red just moments before, suddenly turned a dangerous shade of purple. He slammed both of his massive hands down onto the mahogany table, causing the silverware to violently jump. "You rented out your house," he bellowed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my mother. "You had a perfectly good house sitting empty, and you rented it out to strangers to make a quick buck while you tried to force Lauren to do all the work. You stood on her freezing lawn on Thanksgiving morning crying to us about how you had nowhere to go and no food to eat. You lied to our faces, Carol." Aunt Patricia looked at her sister-in-law with absolute disgust. "You let us attack Lauren online," she whispered, her voice trembling with anger. "You let us ruin her restaurant reviews and send her horrible messages. All because you wanted to pocket $3,000 from an Airbnb rental and make your own daughter act as your unpaid maid." My mother sat frozen. She had absolutely no defense. Terrence stared at the screen, his jaw clenched tightly. He was seeing the real Carol, but Terrence was about to learn that the Airbnb scheme was only the beginning. I did not pause the high-definition video. There was one final, crucial piece left to play. On the large television screen, my mother and sister continued their conversation entirely unaware that their deceit was being broadcast to the very people they manipulated for years. Brittany laughed an arrogant sound. "Good," Brittany said on the recording. "That Airbnb money will cover the exact Prada bag I want for the winter season. I have had my eye on it for months, and this is the easiest cash we have ever made." My mother smiled warmly. "You completely deserve it, sweetheart," my mother cooed. "Just make sure Terrence does not see the new property tax notice when it comes in the mail next week. You know how strict he gets about reviewing household finances." On the screen, Brittany rolled her eyes, letting out a sigh. "Do not worry about Terrence, Mom," she said. "I hide all the important financial mail from him anyway. He has absolutely no idea what goes on with the accounts. But seriously, you need to be careful too. If Lauren ever finds out you secretly transferred the deed of the house into my name last year, she is going to lose her mind. She will immediately stop paying your allowance and the annual property taxes." My mother sneered, waving her hand with contempt. "Lauren is way too busy climbing the corporate ladder to bother checking the county property records. As long as she thinks I am a poor widow living on a fixed income, she will keep writing those checks every month. She is paying the taxes on a house you own outright, Brittany. It is the perfect setup." I tapped the screen of my tablet, and the television instantly went black. The video was over, but the devastating impact of their words hung heavily in the air. The private dining room was so quiet you could hear the faint ticking of Terrence's watch. I watched the carefully constructed lies of my mother and sister completely disintegrate before my eyes. Terrence sat perfectly still, his jaw tightly clenched. He was an intelligent software architect who managed complex data systems. It only took his brain a few seconds to process the staggering magnitude of the financial betrayal he had just witnessed. He slowly turned his head to look at his wife. The look of profound disappointment from earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, furious realization. "You own a house?" Terrence asked, his voice dropping to a dangerously low decibel. "You secretly own your mother's fully paid-off house?" Brittany shrank back in her heavy chair, looking terrified. "Terrence, please let me explain." She stammered, her hands trembling. "Mom just wanted to protect the asset. It is not what it looks like." Terrence stood up, towering over the table. "We have been struggling to pay our mortgage for the last 2 years," Terrence yelled, his voice booming. "You cried to me saying we were drowning in debt. You begged me to drain my savings account. You made me pick up endless overtime projects just to keep our heads above water. And this entire time you owned a secondary property worth $500,000. Aunt Patricia turned to look at my mother, her face twisted in absolute horror. "Carol, you have been taking a monthly allowance from Lauren," Patricia asked, her voice shaking. "You told the entire family Lauren cut you off financially 5 years ago. You sat at my kitchen table playing the victim. You let us think she was a heartless monster, abandoning her elderly mother to starve." I rested my hands flat on the smooth mahogany table. "I have been giving her $2,000 a month for living expenses, plus covering the annual property taxes," I stated calmly, addressing Uncle David and Aunt Patricia directly. "I did it because she claimed the bank was threatening foreclosure, but she legally transferred the deed to Brittany 14 months ago. I have been paying the taxes on a house my sister owns, while my sister simultaneously steals my credit cards to fund her luxury lifestyle." Uncle David looked as though he might be physically sick. He stared at my mother, shaking his head in slow revulsion. "You used us, Carol," he muttered bitterly. "You used your own family as an attack dog to terrorize Lauren, all so you could protect your secret cash flow." My mother looked down at her lap, unable to make eye contact. The golden child and the martyr mother were fully exposed. Brittany was openly weeping again, but this time there was no fake performance involved. These were the genuine tears of a predator who realized her perfect scam was over. But I was not finished breaking them down yet. I slid the thick manila folder across the table directly toward Terrence. The heavy manila folder slid smoothly across the polished mahogany surface, coming to a complete stop inches from Terrence's folded hands. He looked down at the documents but did not immediately reach for them. He was still physically paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal broadcasting from the blank television screen. The silence that fell over the private dining room was no longer the expectant silence of a family waiting for an apology. It was the suffocating dead air of a completely shattered reality. For years, my mother Carol meticulously crafted an image of a struggling widow. She weaponized that image to extract a $2,000 monthly allowance from me. She used it to force Uncle David to mow her lawn for free. She manipulated Aunt Patricia into buying her groceries every month. And all the while she was secretly sitting on a paid-off $500,000 asset that she quietly signed over to her favorite child. Uncle David was the first to break the silence. He dragged his hands down his face, looking visibly aged. "You made me clean your gutters, Carol," he said, his voice cracking with profound anger. "You stood in my driveway last month crying about how you could not afford a handyman because you lived on fixed Social Security. You let me climb a ladder in the freezing rain to fix your roof. And you owned a house free and clear that you gave to Brittany." Aunt Patricia crossed her arms, her face a mask of pure disgust. "And you let me pay for your prescriptions last winter," Patricia added, her tone venomous. "You took my money while secretly plotting to rent your house to vacationers for $3,000 a weekend. You are a complete parasite, Carol." My mother shrank back, unable to meet their furious gazes. She desperately scrambled for a defense, her hands fluttering nervously over her empty wine glass. "I had to do it," she stammered, her voice completely losing its arrogant edge. "I had to protect my assets. Lauren is incredibly wealthy. She manages luxury restaurants and drives a Porsche. She does not need the money. Brittany has a baby on the way, and she needed the financial security. I was just trying to be a good mother and make sure my youngest daughter was taken care of." "A good mother," I repeated, my voice sharp and entirely devoid of sympathy. "You committed financial fraud, Mom. You accepted my money under deliberately false pretenses. You allowed me to pay the property taxes on an asset that you no longer legally owned. You essentially forced me to subsidize Brittany's designer handbag collection while she played the victim to her husband. That is not being a good mother. That is being a financial predator." Brittany let out a dramatic sob, attempting to hide her face behind Terrence's shoulder. "Stop it, Lauren," Brittany cried. "Just stop it. You proved your point. You humiliated us in front of everyone. Are you happy now? Just take your stupid folder and leave us alone." But Terrence did not put his arm around her to offer comfort. Instead, he leaned entirely away, creating a stark physical boundary between them. His eyes were completely fixed on the manila folder resting on the table. The revelation about the house deed and the Airbnb scam was devastating, but his analytical mind recognized there was something else. He knew I had not brought a thick folder just to prove a point about a house deed. "Terrence, what is wrong?" Brittany whimpered, noticing his complete withdrawal. "Please let us just go home. I do not feel well. My stomach is starting to cramp again. Please, Terrence, we need to leave before I have another panic attack." She was desperately trying to play her final remaining card. She was banking on the fake pregnancy and the fabricated medical emergency to provide a quick escape route. She thought she could manipulate his protective instincts to get them out of the room before any more secrets were violently dragged into the light. But Terrence was done being manipulated. He ignored her entirely. He looked across the mahogany table directly into my eyes. His expression was a mixture of dread and grim determination. "What is in the folder, Lauren?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "The fake medical bill Brittany gave you is for $8,000, I stated, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "Open the folder, Terrence. It is time for you to see exactly how much her lies have truly cost you over the years." Terrence reached out and placed his large hand flat over the envelope. The room held its collective breath as he slowly flipped the heavy cover open. Terrence flipped the heavy cardboard cover of the manila folder completely open. The bright overhead lights of the private dining room illuminated the crisp white papers neatly stacked inside. His hands were remarkably steady for a man whose entire marriage was actively disintegrating in front of a live audience. He reached inside and pulled out the first set of documents bound by a paperclip. He stared at the top sheet in absolute silence. It was the official cancellation invoice from Elite Epicurean Catering printed from their billing system. I watched his dark eyes scan the itemized list of luxury foods: herb roasted turkey, truffle mashed potatoes, artisan breads, prime rib. And at the very bottom, printed in bold black ink, was the undeniable total charge of $4,500. "You told me you found a last-minute caterer for $500, Terrence said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You looked me right in the eyes on Thanksgiving morning and asked me to send Lauren $500. But this invoice is for nearly $5,000, and the billing name is not yours." Brittany swallowed hard, her perfectly manicured hands shaking violently in her lap. "It was the holidays, Terrence," she stammered, her voice pitching high and breathless with panic. "I just wanted everything to be perfect for us. Mom said Lauren would not mind if we used her backup emergency card. I was going to pay her back eventually, I swear. I just wanted a nice family dinner." Terrence slowly lowered the paper, looking at her as if she were a complete stranger. "You used a stolen credit card?" He clarified, the brutal reality settling deeply into his bones. "You committed felony fraud against your own sister. You let me stand on her freezing front porch and beg her to let us inside, completely unaware that you had just stolen thousands of dollars from her." "Terrence, please listen to me," Brittany cried, reaching out to grab his sleeve. "Do not touch me," he snapped, pulling his arm away so sharply she physically flinched. He dropped the catering invoice back onto the mahogany table as if the paper were physically burning his fingers. He looked at her, his expression a devastating mixture of profound grief and boiling anger. "You stole $4,500 for a single meal, and you own a $500,000 house." The air in the room grew incredibly heavy. Terrence leaned forward, placing both of his hands flat on the table. "I have been working 80-hour weeks for the last 2 years, he said, his voice thick with raw emotion. "I missed my own mother's 60th birthday trip last month because you cried and told me we could not afford the plane ticket. You watched me drain my entire retirement savings account to pay for the new roof on our house. You watched me suffer. You watched me grind myself into the ground to provide for you while you sat on a secret real estate asset and stole credit cards." Uncle David shook his head in absolute disgust. "You are sick, Brittany," he muttered. "You are deeply sick." Aunt Patricia refused to even look at her niece. She stared fiercely at the wall, her face flushed with second-hand embarrassment. Brittany realized the room had completely turned against her. She reverted to her absolute favorite tactic. She clutched her stomach and let out a loud, dramatic wail. "I was protecting our future. Terrence," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "I am pregnant. I have to think about the baby. You do not understand the overwhelming pressure I am under. Lauren is just trying to twist everything to make me look like a monster because she has always been jealous of me. She is trying to ruin my family. My mother." Carol finally found her voice, desperately trying to salvage the sinking ship. "Terrence, she is carrying your child," Carol interjected, her tone dripping with fake maternal concern. "Pregnancy hormones make women do irrational things. She made a mistake with the credit card, but she did it out of love for family. You cannot abandon your pregnant wife over money." "I did not need to twist anything, Brittany," I said, cutting through my mother's pathetic defense like a knife. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. "Your actions speak entirely for themselves. You did not steal my credit card out of love, and you did not fake an emergency room visit because of hormones." Terrence looked up from the table, his eyes locking onto mine. He looked utterly exhausted, but his mind was sharp. "What do you mean, fake emergency room visit?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I gestured toward the folder. "Turn to the next page." Terrence turned the page with shaking hands. He stared at the next document. It was a photocopy of the exact same hospital invoice Brittany had violently slammed onto the mahogany table just minutes earlier. But this copy was covered in bright red circles and highlighted annotations. I kept my eyes locked on Terrence, leaning back slightly into my heavy leather chair. "Look closely at the formatting of that invoice, Terrence," I instructed calmly. As a director of operations, I process dozens of medical and insurance claims for workplace injuries every single year. I know exactly what a legitimate hospital bill looks like. The piece of paper your wife gave you is a cheap template she downloaded from the internet. Terrence frowned, squinting closely at the paper. First of all, I continued, pointing across the table, "Look at the hospital logo at the top. It is highly pixelated because she copied and pasted a low-resolution image from their public website. Second, look at the billing codes. She used standard dental codes for an emergency obstetric visit. And the most glaring error of all is at the very bottom. She applied a state sales tax to the final total. Hospitals do not charge sales tax on emergency room medical procedures, Terrence. It is a completely fabricated document." Brittany let out a sharp gasp, attempting to snatch the folder away from him. "That is a lie," she shrieked, her voice cracking wildly. "You doctored that paper to make me look crazy." "Terrence, do not listen to her. I was in the hospital. You drove me there yourself. You sat in the waiting room." Terrence held the folder tightly out of her reach, never taking his eyes off the page. He turned to the next document in the stack. It was a verified credit report showing a detailed timeline of transactions. "I did not doctor anything, Brittany," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any sympathy. "Terrence did drive you to the medical center on Thanksgiving evening. But because it is a massive multi-specialty complex with dozens of different clinics, you told him severe flu protocols prevented him from coming inside the triage area with you. You made him sit in the main floor lobby for hours, worrying endlessly about his unborn child." I paused, letting the heavy reality of my words sink into the silent room. "But you did not go to the emergency room, Brittany," I stated firmly. "You went up to the 4th floor. Look at the verified credit report, Terrence. Look at the transaction time-stamped at exactly 8:15 on Thanksgiving night." Terrence traced his finger down the column of numbers until he found the specific line. His breath caught sharply in his throat. It was a charge for exactly $8,000. But the merchant name listed next to the massive charge was not the emergency medical department. It was Lumiere Aesthetics and Wellness. She was not in the emergency room for contractions. Terrence, I delivered the final crushing blow. She was at a luxury medical spa, getting an extensive package of facial fillers, Botox, and a non-surgical cosmetic lift. That is why she demanded $8,000 from me tonight. She needed the immediate cash to cover the massive charge she placed on your joint account before you noticed it. Terrence dropped the paper onto the table, his hands trembling visibly. He looked at Brittany's face, analyzing her features with horrifying clarity. The subtle changes he probably chalked up to pregnancy glow were actually thousands of dollars of premium cosmetic injections. "She is not pregnant, Terrence," I said, my voice dropping to a somber tone. "She has never been pregnant." It was a completely fabricated lie from the very beginning. The silence that followed was deafening. Even my mother and Uncle David were entirely speechless, staring at Brittany in absolute shock. Faking a pregnancy was a level of deception so deeply unhinged that even her most loyal enablers could not find the words to defend it. Terrence looked as though the floor had completely dropped out from beneath him. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table so tightly his knuckles turned entirely white. "Why," he whispered, his voice breaking with profound agony. "Why would you lie about a baby, Brittany? Why would you put me through that kind of emotional torture?" "Because she needed a massive payout," I answered for her, watching Brittany cower in her heavy chair. "Terrence, you have a family trust fund that is locked until you turn 35, unless there is a qualifying life event. Having your first child is a qualifying event. She used the fake pregnancy to manipulate you into legally petitioning the estate lawyers. She faked an entire human life just to get you to unlock your trust fund early so she could access the principal balance." Terrence closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and rolling down his cheek. He had been so incredibly proud to finally become a father. He had bought baby books. He had bought baby books. He had spent his weekends painting the spare bedroom a soft pastel yellow. He had already started a college savings account for a child that never even existed. The sheer cruelty of the manipulation was incomprehensible. I let him mourn the illusion for a few seconds before leaning forward. The emotional devastation was profound, but the financial destruction required immediate intervention. I needed him to see the complete picture before Brittany could spin another web of excuses. "Turn to page 3, Terrence," I said firmly. "The fake pregnancy is a massive emotional betrayal, but you need to see exactly why she was so desperate to get her hands on that trust fund money right now." Terrence wiped his face, his posture rigid. He flipped the page over. The next document was a full comprehensive credit report pulled directly from the major bureaus. But it was not Brittany's credit report. The name printed at the top was Terrence's. "Brittany did not just steal my backup card, Terrence," I explained. "She knew my card had a $5,000 limit, and I would notice the charge immediately. But she has been financing her luxury lifestyle for years using a much more vulnerable target: you." Terrence scanned the document, his dark eyes darting across the columns of numbers. His breathing became shallow and rapid. "Look at the open accounts listed under your Social Security number," I instructed. "You are an architect who prides himself on having zero consumer debt. But according to the credit bureaus, you currently have 5 maxed-out premium credit cards, 2 outstanding personal loans, and a delinquent auto lease for a luxury vehicle you do not drive." Terrence's hands began to shake violently. "What is this?" He choked out, his voice barely audible. "None of these accounts are mine. I have never banked with these institutions. They are yours legally," I clarified, the brutal reality settling over him. "Because Brittany has been actively intercepting your mail and your digital financial statements. She used your Social Security number, your excellent credit history, and your high income to open secret credit lines entirely behind your back. She forged your digital signature on multiple loan applications." Terrence dragged his trembling finger down to the bottom of the page, where the total outstanding balance was printed in bold red ink. "She is $65,000 in debt under your name, Terrence." I delivered the final lethal blow. $65,000 of fraudulent consumer debt that is currently destroying your perfect credit score. She needed your trust fund to pay off the massive mountain of debt she secretly accumulated before the collection agencies started calling your corporate office and garnishing your wages. The private dining room erupted in a collective gasp. Uncle David pushed his chair away from the table, looking at Brittany as if she were a venomous snake. Aunt Patricia covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with absolute horror. Identity theft within a marriage was not just a betrayal, it was a severe federal crime. Terrence dropped the credit report onto the mahogany table. He looked at his wife. The woman he had loved, provided for, and defended against my boundaries, was completely gone. In her place sat a calculated financial predator who had systematically drained his life and forged his identity to buy designer bags and expensive cosmetic procedures. Brittany pushed herself back into her chair, trying to put as much physical distance between herself and Terrence as possible. "Terrence, I can fix it," she stammered. "I can pay it all back. Mom is going to sell the house she gave me. We will use the money to clear the debt. You will not have to pay a single cent, I promise." My mother immediately panicked at the mention of the house. "No, Brittany, you cannot sell that house." Carol snapped, her self-preservation instincts overriding her maternal loyalty. "That is my retirement asset. You promised me you would never sell it. You cannot drag my house into your credit card mess." The golden child and the martyr mother were instantly turning on each other. The moment their shared financial security was threatened, their supposedly unbreakable bond evaporated. They were snapping at each other, completely exposed and scrambling for survival. Terrence did not care about their loud bickering. He stood up slowly, casting a very long shadow over the mahogany table. He looked down at the forged medical bill and the devastating credit report. The honorable peacemaker was completely dead. He stared at Brittany with a piercing intensity. She had weaponized his desire to be a father to cover her criminal tracks. She watched him work himself to the absolute point of exhaustion while secretly burying him alive under fraudulent debt. Terrence did not blink as he stared down at the woman he had pledged his life to. The crushing weight of $65,000 in fraudulent debt hung over the mahogany table like an executioner's blade. Brittany looked back at him and saw that the well of his endless patience had finally run completely dry. Seeing the absolute finality in his dark eyes triggered a violent shift in Brittany. The pathetic whimpering and the fake trembling vanished in an instant. The carefully constructed golden child facade completely shattered, leaving behind the raw, vicious reality of a cornered predator. "Stop looking at me like that!" she shrieked, her voice echoing harshly off the paneled walls. "I had to do it, Terrence. You forced me into this." Terrence remained dead silent, letting her dig her own grave deeper with every word. Brittany abruptly spun around, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at our mother. "It is her fault!" Brittany screamed, her face twisting with venom. "Do not look at me." Terrence, look at her. She is the one who taught me how to survive in this family. She is the one who told me that men are just walking bank accounts and that a smart woman always keeps a secret stash of money. She taught me how to forge signatures when I was in high school, so she could siphon money out of my father's retirement accounts before the divorce. My mother gasped, clutching her chest in horror. "Brittany, shut your mouth right now," Carol hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward Uncle David and Aunt Patricia, who were watching the implosion with sickened fascination. "I will not shut up," Brittany yelled back, slamming her fists onto the table. "You told me to use the backup credit card on Thanksgiving, Mom. You told me to secure the house deed so Lauren could not touch it. You taught me that the only way to get what you want is to take it behind everyone's back. You made me this way." Then Brittany pivoted her rage back toward her husband. Her eyes were wild and completely devoid of any remorse. "And you, Terrence," she sneered, her upper lip curling in disgust. "You claim you worked so hard for us, but your paycheck was an absolute joke. You put me on a pathetic budget. You expected me to clip coupons and shop at discount stores while my sister was driving a Porsche and wearing tailored designer suits. I deserved a luxury lifestyle. I deserved the expensive vacations and the designer clothes. If you had just given me a proper allowance, I would never have needed to use your social security number to get those credit cards. You pushed me into debt because you were too cheap to provide for your wife properly." The sheer audacity of her accusation sucked the remaining oxygen out of the private dining room. She had stolen his identity, racked up massive debt to inject fillers into her face, and was now aggressively blaming him for not voluntarily handing her the cash to do it. Terrence's jaw clenched so tightly the muscles jumped beneath his skin. He placed his large hands flat over the manila folder, protecting the evidence of her crimes. Seeing the documents resting under his hands sent my mother into a blind panic. She realized that if Brittany had forged Terrence's signature on loan applications, there might be a paper trail linking her to the house deed fraud or the stolen American Express card. Carol's self-preservation instinct kicked into overdrive. "Give me those papers," Carol demanded, her voice shrill and desperate. She shoved her chair back and lunged across the wide mahogany table. She reached her hands out wildly, her long fingernails scraping against the polished wood, violently trying to snatch the manila folder right out from under Terrence's hands. "Give them to me right now. This is a private family matter, and you are not leaving this room with our personal documents." Terrence did not flinch. He did not pull the folder away. Instead, he stood up completely to his full height. At 6'3", with broad shoulders, built from years of college athletics, his physical presence in the confined space was suddenly overwhelming. He did not need to raise his hands or shout a single word. He just stood there, an imposing, immovable wall of absolute fury, staring down at the woman who had helped destroy his life. His sudden towering stature and the lethal coldness in his eyes acted like a physical blow. Carol froze in mid-lunge, her hands hovering inches from the folder. The manic screaming abruptly died in Brittany's throat. The entire room fell into a terrifying, paralyzed silence as the reality of Terrence's wrath finally commanded their absolute submission. Terrence kept his dark eyes locked on my mother. "Sit down, Carol," he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the heavy weight of an absolute order. Carol slowly lowered her arms and sank back into her heavy wooden chair, her face pale and shining with cold sweat. She did not dare to speak another word. Terrence calmly slid the thick manila folder back across the polished mahogany table, pulling it completely out of her reach. He tapped the edges of the papers together, aligning them into a perfect stack. He turned his attention back to Brittany. She was trembling so violently that her chair rattled against the floorboards. She looked up at him, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks. The arrogant, entitled woman who had demanded an $8,000 check just 20 minutes ago was entirely gone. She was finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of her own actions. She had pushed a good, honorable man past the point of no return. Terrence did not scream. He did not throw the papers or overturn the table. His towering rage had rapidly cooled into a terrifying, absolute detachment. He looked at his left hand. He stared at the simple brushed gold wedding band resting on his ring finger. It was the ring he had proudly worn for 4 years. It was the symbol of a vow he had taken with complete sincerity, believing he was building a life with a woman who shared his values of honesty and hard work. Slowly and methodically, Terrence reached over with his right hand. He grasped the gold band and pulled it, sliding it smoothly over his knuckle. The metallic scrape of the ring coming off sounded impossibly loud in the dead silence of the private dining room. Brittany let out a strangled gasp, reaching her hands out toward him in a pathetic, begging gesture. "Terrence, please do not do this," she sobbed, her voice completely broken. "Please give me a chance to explain. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. I love you." Terrence ignored her pleas entirely. He looked down at the forged documents resting on the table. He gently placed his gold wedding band directly on top of the fraudulent credit report, right over the bold red ink that displayed the $65,000 outstanding balance. It was a perfectly deliberate symbolic gesture. The marriage was officially overburied under a mountain of her deceit. "I will be contacting my attorney first thing tomorrow morning," Terrence said, his voice steady and completely devoid of any affection. "I will be filing for an immediate divorce. And I want to make this absolutely clear to you, Brittany. I will not be paying a single cent of that debt. I will be pressing federal charges for identity theft and credit card fraud. I will hand every single piece of evidence in this folder directly to the authorities. You forged my signature, and you stole my future. Now you face the legal consequences on your own." Brittany collapsed forward, resting her head on the mahogany table and wailing loudly. She knew Terrence was a man of his word. He never made empty threats. The comfortable, luxurious life she had built on a foundation of lies was completely vaporizing right in front of her eyes. She was going to lose her husband, her social status, and potentially her freedom. Terrence turned his back to his weeping wife, completely unmoved by her dramatic tears. He looked across the table directly at me. The harshness in his eyes softened, melting into a look of profound, genuine regret. He let out a long, exhausted breath, his broad shoulders slumping slightly as the adrenaline began to leave his body. "Lauren," he said, his voice thick with sorrow, "I owe you the deepest apology of my life. I allowed them to manipulate me. I believed their lies, and I stood on your front porch judging you for protecting your own home. I actually thought you were being cruel. I was completely blind to the financial and emotional abuse they were putting you through, because I wanted to believe I married into a good family. I am so incredibly sorry for ever doubting your integrity." "You do not owe me an apology, Terrence," I replied softly, maintaining eye contact. "You were a victim of their manipulation too. I just needed you to see the truth before they dragged you down." "Thank you for opening my eyes, Lauren," he said, giving me a respectful nod. Terrence picked up his heavy winter coat. He did not look at Brittany or my mother. He simply turned and walked toward the exit. The heavy oak door clicked shut with a solid, definitive thud, leaving them all behind. The heavy oak door clicked shut with a solid, definitive thud, leaving them all behind. The echo of that sound seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, marking the absolute end of an era. Brittany stared at the closed door, her mouth hanging open in silent shock. The reality of what had just happened crashed over her like a tidal wave. She was not just losing her husband. She was losing her primary source of income, her pristine social standing, and her absolute shield against the consequences of her own actions. She looked down at the gold wedding band resting on the forged credit report and let out a guttural wail, collapsing completely over the mahogany table. Uncle David and Aunt Patricia immediately stood up, pushing their chairs away from the table, as if the area around my sister had suddenly become radioactive. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with the federal crimes sitting in that manila folder. They grabbed their winter coats in complete silence, refusing to look at my mother or Brittany. Uncle David shot me a single brief nod of acknowledgement before escorting his wife out of the room. They were completely done playing the loyal flying monkeys. The audience was gone and the extortion plot had failed spectacularly. My mother Carol watched her brother leave, her eyes wide with mounting panic. She looked at her golden child sobbing uncontrollably over the table, and the grim mathematics of the situation finally computed in her brain. Brittany was $65,000 in debt, facing an aggressive divorce, and staring down the barrel of federal identity theft charges. Terrence was gone, and his massive income was taking a permanent walk with him. Brittany could no longer fund Carol's luxury lifestyle. In fact, Brittany was going to drag my mother down into the financial abyss with her. Survival instinct took over completely. Carol immediately turned her attention away from her favorite daughter and locked her desperate eyes onto me. The feral panic on her face morphed into a pathetic attempt at maternal authority. "Lauren, you need to fix this right now," Carol demanded, her voice trembling but trying to sound commanding. "You have the money to pay off that debt. You can hire a good defense lawyer for your sister. If you just clear the credit cards, Terrence might come back. You cannot just sit there and watch your own family fall apart." I did not answer her. I calmly reached across the table and picked up my silver corporate tablet. I wiped the screen with a microfiber cloth from my bag, completely unbothered by her frantic orders. When I ignored her, my mother escalated her demands, shifting from giving orders to aggressive begging. "Lauren, listen to me," Carol pleaded, gripping the edge of the mahogany table. "I am an elderly woman on a fixed income. I cannot deal with this kind of stress. You need to wire my $2,000 allowance first thing tomorrow morning. Actually, you need to double it this month. I am going to need extra cash to handle the lawyers and the fallout from this disaster. You are my eldest daughter, and you have a financial obligation to take care of your mother." I slid my tablet neatly into my structured leather tote bag. Then I gathered the original copies of the American Express fraud reports and the Elite Epicurean cancellation invoice. I slipped them back into my own pristine folder, leaving the copies of Brittany's crimes on the table. I stood up from my heavy leather chair, brushing an invisible piece of lint off my tailored charcoal blazer. I looked directly down at my mother. "I do not have a single obligation to you, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing sub-zero temperature. "I have been financially supporting you for years because you lied and told me you were drowning in debt. You deliberately manipulated my sense of duty while secretly hoarding a $500,000 asset." "But, Lauren, I am your mother," Carol stammered, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape hatch. "You cannot just cut me off. How am I supposed to pay my utility bills? How am I supposed to buy my groceries?" I zipped my leather tote bag entirely shut, locking my financial world away from her grasping hands forever. "You transferred the deed of your fully paid-off house to Brittany," I stated, laying out the cold, hard legal reality. "You gave her the ultimate financial safety net. That means she is now legally responsible for your upkeep, your taxes, and your retirement. I am officially done." Carol physically recoiled as if I had violently struck her across the face. But she has absolutely no money, Carol shrieked wildly, pointing at Brittany, who was still slumped over the table weeping into her arms. She is $65,000 in debt, Lauren. She is going to lose everything. She is going to jail. You cannot just leave us like this. We are your family. That is a problem for the homeowner to solve. Mom, I replied, my tone completely indifferent. I suggest you start by selling all those designer handbags she bought with Terrence's identity. Or maybe you can rent out the house on Airbnb full-time to cover her legal defense fees. But do not ever ask me for another dime. I turned my back on my mother and began walking toward the heavy oak door. Uncle David and Aunt Patricia had not actually made it out into the hallway yet. They were lingering awkwardly by the exit, joined by Aunt Susan, who had been sitting quietly in the corner this entire time. They were standing like a barricade of heavy winter coats, blocking my path to the lobby. Aunt Susan reached out a trembling hand, placing it lightly on my forearm. "Lauren, please." Susan whispered, her eyes darting nervously back toward the table where Carol was now hyperventilating. "You have made your point. Terrence is gone. Brittany is completely ruined. You won. But you cannot just walk away and leave your mother with nothing. Family is family, Lauren. You have to be the bigger person here. You are the strong one. You always have been." I looked down at Susan's hand resting on my sleeve. I did not pull away, but I stared at it until she nervously retracted her fingers. "I am not the bigger person, Aunt Susan," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "I am just the person who finally stopped paying for the privilege of being abused." Uncle David shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "Now listen here, Lauren." David started trying to muster some of his old patriarchal authority. "Your mother made some terrible choices. We all see that now. But throwing her to the wolves is cruel. You are a wealthy executive. You can afford to help her set up a small apartment or get her a good lawyer for Brittany. If you walk out that door tonight, you are tearing this entire family apart forever." I looked at the group of enablers standing in front of me. For my entire life, these people had watched my mother and sister treat me like a bank account and a servant. They had never once intervened to protect me. In fact, they had actively participated in the abuse the moment it became convenient for them. "I am not tearing this family apart, Uncle David," I replied, my voice completely steady. "I am just refusing to carry the pieces anymore. You all sat back and watched them scam me on Thanksgiving. You all believed their ridiculous lies about me locking a pregnant woman out in the freezing cold. You sent me hateful text messages. You let your children post fabricated one-star reviews on my corporate business pages to try and get me fired from my job. You were perfectly happy to watch them destroy my life as long as it kept the peace and kept Carol from complaining to you." Aunt Patricia looked down at her shoes, her face flushed dark red with shame. None of them had a single word of defense. "So here's how this is going to work. From now on," I said, squaring my shoulders and looking each of them directly in the eye. "I am walking out of this country club, and I am returning to my peaceful, successful life. I am no longer your scapegoat. I am no longer your emergency fund, and I am no longer a target for your toxic drama." I took a step closer to the door, forcing them to step back and make room for me. The cease and desist order I had my corporate attorney send is still incredibly active. I warned, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "If any of you ever attempt to contact me again, I will consider it harassment. If you text my personal phone, if you show up at my property, or if you ever leave another fake review on any business associated with my name, my lawyer will serve you immediately. I have documented every single threat and every single piece of defamation. I will sue you for tortious interference, and I will drain your retirement accounts in civil court. Do you understand me?" Aunt Susan nodded frantically, tears welling in her eyes. Uncle David swallowed hard, stepping completely out of the doorway and pressing his back against the wall. They finally understood that the boundaries I was setting were forged in iron. There would be no second chances and no family reunions. "Enjoy cleaning up the mess you enabled," I said. I walked through the doorway and did not look back. I strode down the long carpeted hallway of the country club, the muffled sounds of my mother's frantic sobbing fading away behind me. I pushed open the heavy glass front doors and stepped out into the freezing November night. The valet brought my Porsche around almost immediately. I handed him a generous tip, slid into the plush leather driver's seat, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the circular driveway and merged onto the dark, quiet highway, I took a deep breath of the crisp, cold air. For the first time in my entire life, I was completely free. The drive home was just the beginning of my new life. Over the next few months, the absolute chaos I left behind in that private dining room played out exactly as I knew it would. I completely blocked every single phone number associated with my extended family. My encrypted cloud folder remained securely locked away because they were far too terrified of my corporate lawyers to ever breathe my name in public again. The silence that settled over my daily routine was absolutely golden, and the harsh consequences they faced were entirely self-inflicted. Terrence did not waste a single day wallowing in pity. True to his word, he filed for a highly aggressive divorce the very next morning. He also followed through on the federal identity theft charges. Brittany tried to play the desperate victim during the initial legal proceedings. She attempted to cry in front of the judge, claiming the $65,000 in fraudulent credit card debt was accidentally accumulated for household necessities and future baby preparations. But Terrence had the ruthless precision of an analytical architect and the undeniable paper trail I had handed him at the country club. His high-powered legal team completely eviscerated her tearful narrative in family court. To avoid serving federal prison time for wire fraud and gross identity theft, Brittany was forced into a brutal settlement agreement. The judge ordered her to completely liquidate her assets to make Terrence financially whole. That meant the $500,000 house my mother Carol had secretly transferred into Brittany's name had to be immediately put on the market. Carol tried to fight the forced sale in civil court, screaming to anyone who would listen that it was her primary retirement asset. But her name was no longer legally on the deed. She had signed away her own security to protect a scam. The golden child had become the ultimate financial liability. The house sold well below market value because Brittany was absolutely desperate to pay off the court-ordered restitution before the strict legal deadline. Terrence got his money back, cleared his pristine name from the fraudulent accounts, and walked away from the toxic nightmare completely clean. I heard through the grapevine of a mutual corporate acquaintance that he was thriving and had recently been promoted to a senior partner at his software firm. He deserved every bit of his newly reclaimed peace. As for my mother and sister, their grand manipulative schemes left them with absolutely nothing. Without the paid-off house, without Terrence's massive income, and without my reliable monthly $2,000 allowance, they were completely destitute. The remaining money from the rushed house sale was entirely swallowed by their mounting legal fees and paying back the stolen funds to the credit bureaus. Today, Carol and Brittany are sharing a tiny, cramped two-bedroom apartment on the gritty outskirts of the city. From what I understand, they absolutely despise each other. The martyr mother and the entitled golden child are now trapped in a miserable reality of their own making. They spend their days constantly blaming one another for their absolute downfall. Brittany is forced to work a grueling minimum-wage retail job just to pay the basic rent, while Carol sits in their tiny, dimly lit living room, bitterly complaining about her lost luxury and ruined social status. They finally have the exact life they deserve. While their world burned to the ground, my world expanded beautifully. Without the constant parasitic weight of my family dragging down my finances and draining my emotional bandwidth, I poured my energy entirely into my career. My hospitality group recognized my flawless crisis management and my ability to protect corporate assets under extreme pressure. In late September, just before the chaotic holiday season began, the board of directors officially promoted me to vice president of operations. It came with a massive executive salary increase, a generous equity package, and the ultimate validation of my hard work. I was no longer just managing the flagship restaurant. I was running the entire regional division. When the next Thanksgiving finally rolled around, I did not receive a single frantic text message about dry turkeys or freezing lawns. I did not buy a single raw grocery item or worry about protecting my credit score from extortion. Instead, I woke up to the soothing sound of crashing ocean waves. I had booked a first-class flight to Maui for a 2-week luxury vacation. I spent Thanksgiving morning walking along the pristine white sand, feeling the warm tropical sun on my skin. That afternoon, I sat on the private balcony of my 5-star oceanfront suite, wearing a lightweight linen dress. I ordered a spectacular ahi tuna poke bowl and a freshly shaken mango cocktail from room service. I raised my cold glass to the endless blue horizon, taking a deep, satisfying sip. I had created my own peace by burning the false bridges to the ground. The fire had cleared the toxic underbrush from my life, leaving behind nothing but fertile ground and absolute freedom.